Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your hosts, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense. Welcome back to the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Gambino, and I am here with Dr. Joseph Illuminati LaVacca over there. I can see him much more crystal clear with that little backlight over there. Love it.
I'm telling you, it really made a big difference. For the next couple weeks, I will definitely use it, and then we'll see how it goes in the new place. Like I said, a lot more natural light, I think, in the new place, a lot brighter, a little bit more updated. I think I've referred to my apartment the way my landlord had referred to my apartment, which is grandma chic. And it turns out that Avery and I have grown out of grandma chic.
Mm-hmm.
And even, being of the Italian heritage, being surrounded by, the baby angel faces, the ornate God above my oven. I don't know if I ever sent you a picture of that before. This beautiful picture of Venice that I have for some reason in the kitchen. I think we've realized not our style.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just time to move on. Yeah, we're excited.
How are you going to be describing the new apartment?
New apartment. Let's say, I know I got to come up with a good word for it. I got to get in there and feel the vibes.
I see. Okay,
right.
fair enough.
Modern something, but
modern grandma. Got a modern grandma feel.
Maybe more like modern stepdad or something like that.
All right.
Maybe we'll stick with the family theme, or like modern uncle, or
I'll have to pull this back up once you're in there for a couple weeks.
Yeah. We'll figure it out.
Well, anyway, you can find Joe and I very easily on Instagram. That's where we're most active, at Joe Gambino DPT for myself, at Strength in Motion _PT for LaVacca over there. You can find this podcast on Instagram, Beyond Pain Podcast, and you can find this on YouTube as well, Cups of Joe _PT. I think I got it all. And there is a link in the show notes for all this stuff. But if you do feel like you want some of our help, there is an application form as well. Please feel free to reach out, and one of us will get back to you. Joe, welcome back. I think we have a question from you today.
Yes, I do. I think oftentimes when we talk about our clients, a lot of it stems from, how do we get people motivated? How do we get people consistent, especially when they're in pain? And I think the most common thing we see is people holding back, maybe overprotecting, dropping weight, dropping reps, dropping sets, dropping frequency or days at the gym. But then every once in a while, I do think we probably get people who come along who are very eager to get out of pain, who hear our message and boom, go full throttle with it, right? Where tolerable pain during a workout is merely a thought process, because you can tolerate any amount of pain,
Sure,
really, when you think about it. So I have a client right now, one of my hardest working clients. And one of the themes that keeps coming up in our weekly check-ins and conversations is this frustration. And when we look at his program, he's pushing as hard as he can with all these isometrics. He's pushing the shoulder into painful positions. He's really trying to open up that space for himself. And then when he has very sharp pain, it sort of leads to this discouragement again. So we've been trying to navigate expectations while not holding him back. And I wanted to bring that up to you, because I'm sure you've had clients like this, and I'm sure there are clients like that listening right now. How can we help them in this process of knowing when they're maybe pushing too hard and hitting the throttle too much too soon?
Yeah, I think there's two ways
in this particular example that I would go about. One would be, education on like why you shouldn't be ramping hard into pain, because that's a recipe for flare-ups, and especially if it's closing angle discomfort, like you have some sort of impingement stuff going on. We know it's a joint issue kind of underlying there. There's no amount of isometrics or pushing through it that's going to make it better. It just kind of potentially end up making it worse. And especially with this person where it's like a frustration and this like yo-yoing of feeling better, pushing, and then moving back. How do you get them out of that cycle? So I think just some education on like what's going on there and why you shouldn't be pushing super hard. And then I'd probably give them like very specific guidelines on like how hard I want them to push. I'd give them the percentages of effort and then see how things go. The other thing I would probably do in a situation like this is find other places where they can push hard that are safer is not the right word, but like where I know that they can do it with no problem. So if intensity is something that they enjoy and makes them feel good, what can we start to like almost like shift their focus on? Like, okay, well, I don't want you to like isometric your shoulder to death, but you like to work hard, like maybe there's some stuff from a lower extremity standpoint, or maybe there's a pull version if a push is painful that we can say, why don't we just go heavy here? Let's go harder here, take it to failure or whatever it is that you want to do. But this should allow us to actually move forward versus moving forward and then taking the step back and constantly playing this game of back and forth. I'm curious, A, what do you think about that? And B, what have you been doing with this particular person?
Yeah, no, I think that obviously the education piece always comes, first and foremost. The idea of trying to determine when or what structures or tissues are capable of handling more. I think that for the most part, I've started falling out of the notion all the time, thinking that a closing angle pain is always a joint. And I think we might have mentioned that on the podcast before, because I do think that inflammation can lead to that. I do think that tendons can sort of share that sort of like similar property. So I'll combine that with like range of motion loss. But anyway, when it comes back to this particular client, or maybe clients that we've worked with in the past, I think that my normal inclination is to keep bringing them back to this idea that, okay, you're pushing really, really hard. What's happening after the fact? Because I can see this going two ways. One, you're pushing really, really hard. You're showing yourself, hey, I can work through almost anything, which is good. But then does it have an impact on your function, 6, 12, or 24 hours later? So you push all you want. I mean, I can't objectively measure your pain for you. I can't feel it. I can't see it. But I can talk to you about it. I can hear your experience. So in the beginning, when we were sort of first navigating this, and I saw how committed he was, my natural intention was, hey, look, we still don't know enough about the shoulder. I'm basically treating you like a chronic rotator cuff tear. Yeah, there is some data out there that, surgery could be helpful. You seem to have passed the window where we would get the most benefit. Not that it can't be beneficial still, but I don't know if we've given ourselves enough time or space to really know for certain if we could be successful. So I did purposely pull him back a little bit earlier. Then as his range became pretty symmetrical compared to the other side, there are still some glaring weaknesses between right and left, but now I'm sort of giving him the keys a little bit more because he is pain-free during the day. He's not seemingly having much sleep disturbance. But the thing that I think is kind of important is that he'll be riding high, like, hey, okay, cool. Like I'm good. And then it's like a deck of cards, right? And I think that for him, that emotional sway up and down can be discouraging. And I don't want that to sort of take away from the progress that he's made or make him feel like he's not being, or that the consistency isn't paying off in some way, shape, or form. Because I think we've had these conversations around moments of pain. So I can go through a whole workout and I'm looking at some of his things he's doing right now. Maybe there's, 5 or 6 things that he's doing, when you count in finishers and stuff. And for the most part, it's going good fatigue, going good fatigue. And then bam, super pain. And then we kind of get caught up in that one particular motion or exercise. So most of the time, at least lately, things within the workouts have been going well, but it seems like these higher effort thresholds gave him a little bit of trouble. So that's what we're kind of working on now. So I guess it's come down to this idea of like where he was in his rehab, where people have been in his rehab. And for the most part, I'll be honest, if you think you can tolerate it, then go ahead and tolerate it. However, I do think that we need to be a little bit more objective to set you up for success long term. And in that case, if we did see a loss of function, then we have to hit the timeout button, right? Because then it's not just like this little ebb and flow thing. So I think for him, it's going to become a lot more managing emotion, maybe even managing the tissue, because it doesn't seem like the tissue is necessarily suffering, except in that moment in time. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you've ever thought about letting people, like, when do you just let people bite down, push through it, and just say like, hey, I'm here?
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I let the response to how they feel be the determining factor, right? If we're having these flare-ups, but, everything is great and we're just kind of managing the high. I mean, like with that, I'm probably going to have him just back off, and I'd probably give him like, okay, this is the position that we're going to be working on, like this particular range of motion within that pattern. And I want you to go and figure out like, when does it start to be pain? I want you to measure that. Like, what is that internally to you? 50% with your head and like, your arm in almost full flexion. Sure. Okay. That's what we're going to do. But now what I want to see is over the next 4 weeks, that I go from 50% to 70% and 80%. Because sometimes people, when they have something to measure now, yeah, it's helpful for them. It's not just like this, like random, I have to push this and I have to go hard. Like, okay, well, this is what's tolerable. And now I can like see progress in the sense, because now it's the same position, it's repeatable. And then when you see you go from 50% before pain to 70%, you realize there's actual change happening. That's probably what I would do there. But otherwise, if someone was just pushing and they're like, I was a little bit uncomfortable, I'm going to fall to those pain guidelines that we've talked about 1,000 times in this podcast. It's like, is it go over a 4? Does it last for 2, 3, 4, 5 days? In a case like this, even if it wasn't within those ranges, and the person was like always on super edge about it, and like it was like frustrating, and we have to like talk them off the cliff every single time. Those are the times where I'm probably going to say, okay, like we need to reevaluate here. If someone's pushing, I have a client very similar. He's like always like his isometrics are probably like harder than him trying to do like a 1 RM bench press. Like he's like always as hard as possible. But if there's no pain, nothing really kind of going on, I'm not going to stop them from doing that. It's when it starts to become like all of a sudden, like, we've talked about this on the podcast. Like if someone's navigating that line of pain, we should still see that they're tolerating more stress, that things are starting to feel better. Things are, as long as they're giving enough rest and recovery in between, that there's like, we can see some sort of benefit happening from an objective motion standpoint, from a pain standpoint, from a function standpoint. But if they're toying that line and there's not any progress, or their pain is like building up, or it's like not what we'd expect for rehab, then you have to make the adjustment. And I think really it comes down to less so about what you're pushing into or how hard you're working, but it's always the response afterwards that should really guide what's going on. And once people really learn how to listen to their body, I think that's a game changer for most people. So yeah, I think that's kind of really what I got there for you.
Yeah, no, I think I like that idea of like, just going back to like measuring effort. Hey, like we know the couple of like isometric positions or movements that are really causing some pain. So having him hone in on that, I think will be part of our conversation. I'm going to see him over the weekend. The other thing I thought though, that was sort of like tricking me, because he does really well with all of his like pulling exercises. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're having crushed lower body. So I think in that case, one of my also go-tos, and we've talked about this, is, hey, what can you do really well? Let's push that as hard as possible. Go as heavy as you can on squats, as deadlifts, because you'll get that systemic effect of strength by doing a lot of these bigger compound movements. So I guess what's lingering in my mind is, without the, I guess, let's say repercussion and function 6, 12, 24 hours later, is there any detriment to just letting him push as hard as he can, sharp pain in the moment? Because I do that. And I think I mentioned that in like the first couple episodes we were talking about how we deal with injury. I poke it, I prod it. I kind of like start laughing like, oh my God, this could not be more painful than when I've had injury. And I just keep doing it. So I don't know if I'm doing myself a disservice. Am I lingering that pain around? I mean, I've been able to recover, luckily. Again, knock on wood. I think this is the second episode we've been knocking on wood for me.
Back to back too.
But like of all the things I've read about pain, there's very few, if any, studies that I can recall that are just like comparing one group where it's like, hey, we're going to let this group be tolerable. We're going to let this group just go to 8s, 9s, and 10s because, who's really going to push themselves that hard anyway? And then let's see where they're at 6, 12, 24 weeks later.
I need to see if I could refine that article that I could pull the pain guidelines from in the past and try to remember exactly why those numbers popped up, because I pulled the pain guidelines like many years ago when I was at Perfect Stride. I found an article that kind of talked about it, and I don't really remember the nuances of it. I just remember at this point the scale, and it's worked really well for me, helping people kind of understand pain a little bit better and what to expect and things like that. But it's not a hard, fast rule. I mean, some people could be within the pain guidelines and struggle, and some people can go over it and be fine, right? So again, going back to how people feel and tolerate. I mean, there's been plenty of times where I've had some pain, or I've kind of like, don't go into, the rule, don't go into closing angle pain, or don't really do this. And I've done it before, and afterwards I feel really good, right? So like, sure, I think everyone should have the ability to play. I want to try it, especially when you're feeling better, right? I want to like push it a little bit more. I think people, and it actually always brings me back to one patient I had a Perfect Stride, it was ACL. But people who push themselves a little bit more, especially in times when they start to feel better, tend to do better in rehab overall than the person who's afraid to push it. And I had somebody who was an ACL. She was a gymnast, very, very active, had ACL surgery. She was young, and she just like almost always was like just overdoing it with her knee. She'd always come back with these like little flare-ups and things like that. But as we were going through the journey, she like progressed very quickly. Range of motion came back fast, strength came back fast. Everything went really well. And I was just like, people just need to kind of explore it. And if it's too much, it's too much. It's not going to break you, right? You just need to process, again, like your patient can feel the frustration and process it. But at some point, you have to kind of come back down and revisit things and then figure out, is it something I need to continue going down this path, or do I need to adjust the pathway? And I mean, he's lucky enough to have you where you can help him make those decisions. But the people who are fearful of things, it takes longer for recovery. And the people who just go out and explore tend to do better, in my experience, with myself, with the people that I've worked with. So I think exploration is an important part of rehab and getting over pain, because you may push it and realize, this was good, this was safe, I feel better. And all of a sudden, mentally now, your nervous system, everything, the guard's down. Okay, I can push through this. I can do this. It's empowering in a sense. And then sure, if it flares up, it can be detrimental. It can feel like you've hit a wall. It can feel like a setback. It can be frustrating and sad. But and then I also say, hey, let's see what the recovery timeline looks like for that person. There's been plenty of times where someone's afraid of these flare-ups because it can take them months to recover, and they have a flare-up down the line, and it's like, oh, in like 3 days, I felt better. Well, look at that. You had this major flare-up, but in 3 days' time, you're back to normal. We can go and push again. It's not 2 months. Look at how far you've come. So I think regardless of pain, no pain, you can learn a lot about pushing your body. And I think when people get over the hump of being scared of pain and just taking it as information that they can learn from and adjust from, that's a game changer for somebody. That's been a game changer for me with my pain journey and history. And I mean, I've known all this stuff, and it can still be frustrating for me to have pain. So, if you don't know any of this stuff, I can see how it can be very, very frustrating for you. But yeah, I mean, exploration, I think, is a key component of all of this process.
Yeah, I think play, exploration, I love those words. And it kind of brought me back to the peak end rule with any experience. And I don't know why I didn't think about that with him or really anyone training recently, but we tend to judge our experiences on like high highs or low lows, or just how that experience ends. And, I think we mentioned this with vacations before. We were talking about Mexico, actually. Yeah, I could be having a great family vacation, but my flight gets delayed on the way home. And now I talk about that vacation like, oh, what a terrible experience. So the way that it ended kind of negated what I felt like during the course of those days. So maybe what I'll start to play with is more of this like positioning too, now that I'm talking to you. If we know that these 1 or 2 movements are going to be particularly painful, maybe we put them at the beginning, so that they're not at the end. He's not like doing them with the finisher. He's not kind of going through his whole workout, but put him in the beginning. Hey, all right, that was a little bit frustrating. But then look what you're able to do after it. You're able to do push press. You're able to do this. You're able to do really heavy bent over rows. You're able to do a push up. And then maybe that will be a little way to help him with his frustration. So I'm going to try that.
Yeah, that's could be good. I think just having like a lot of times what I have with people after an assessment is like, here's 2 or 3 things that we want to see change, and we're going to track them and measure them. And they're almost like a test for you also. So if you do something in the gym or you do these things, and all of a sudden you feel like those movements are more painful or way worse, then you know you're probably pushing too hard in whatever you're doing. So I think having like a couple of objective things, because we know pain's a terrible measure of progress, because pain can fluctuate up and down for almost sometimes no reason at all. So I like always giving someone like, this is the homework. These are the movements that we're tracking. We want to see these things have progress. So when flare-ups do happen or whatever, we can always fall back on those movements. Look at how much these have changed. This is exactly what we wanted. This flare-up is just a little blip in the journey. Now we can kind of get back on track. I know we've gotten really far off of our original topic, but
no, but that's good. I think they were,
exactly what
I was hoping for.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Well, Joe, thank you for all your insight. Thank you
as
for
well.
your time. I love you. Listeners, we love you. Thank you for making it through another episode of the podcast. Let's go with our heart. Dang, I feel like I keep messing it up, though. Is that right?
You just gotta
turn it up.
Supinate that a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, you're right. Now I got it. All right. Thank you again. And please make sure you come back next week for another exciting episode of the Beyond Pain podcast.